And as frustrated as I am because I love the UFC as a brand,
Yeah.
I don't like some of the people that work for them because it's that corporate nonsense. And it's the same in every industry. I'm, yeah, it's frustrating, but at the same time, if they came to me now and said, "Hey, can you come back? We'll restart inside the octagon. You can commentate again." On my heart, I wouldn't do it. On
Wow.
my heart, I wouldn't do it because I wouldn't want to be back on the inside of that
Mm.
machine. Like it needs people like me and Ariel on the outside, and Ariel is an absolute powerhouse, and he's been inspiring to me over the last couple of years. We need people on the outside of the sport pointing out what's going wrong. Like matching Nate Diaz up with Hamzat Chimaev, we all know what that was. We all knew what that was. Unfortunately, it worked out that that fight didn't happen. And then what did we get from Dana the week after? It's a good thing that fight didn't happen. That would have been really bad. Like, yeah, man. Like we don't we I don't have to buy your bullshit anymore because I know it's bullshit. Like you
Mm.
know what you're doing. It was an assassination attempt. Like they were trying to bury him before he left his UFC contract. I I, I can't like and I see Bisping on shows like you know trashing me for what I said and then backing up my opinion. I'm like I couldn't. Sergei Lavrov, a random name to throw out there, sits in front of the UN Security Council with delegates from around the world and lies through his teeth. Lies through his teeth because he's owned by Putin and by the Kremlin. I felt like that working for the UFC. I felt like I had to toe this line, and I don't feel like I have to anymore. Like my nickname's the Outlaw for a reason. I'm not supposed to be inside the organization, and if I am, I'm supposed to be unpicking it and taking it down. I mean, that's just my nature.
It is hard because for me, I'm a diehard UFC fan. I want to love the organization, but when, like you mentioned there, when you see something like a Hamzat, Nate Diaz, it just makes you feel a little bit, it makes you feel a bit sick, and it makes you feel like, I don't know, dirty to watch it. It just didn't sit right with me at all. So I hope that the UFC isn't gonna continue going in that direction. I like to stay optimistic, but who knows?
Who knows? I mean, they'll do controversial things because they make money. And in the day and age of Jake Paul, unfortunately, I think Dana feels like he has to do things like that to keep the sport moving forward. For me, the UFC has already established itself as the figurehead of the sport. There's no doubt in that, and I don't think for any second that any other organization is going to come close to where the UFC are and what they're doing. Like they will always be the Premiership for mixed martial arts.
Yeah.
They just need to act like the Premiership, and they need to act like the Premier League in the sport. They need to be the custodians of the sport. And when I first started working with the UFC, like I remember going to charities in Sweden and handing out money from the UFC to support the grassroots organizations, and of course they're supporting of the IMAFs and those kind of things. Like they do lots of good things within the sport, but then it also has to be the example also has to be set from the top down. Like that Chimaev against Diaz fight felt more like it just felt like an execution. You know what I mean? And that to me felt like you've got one person or one small group of people that are utilizing one part of the roster to punish the other part of the roster. That's not sport. That's
Mm.
not sport. That's dogfighting. That's it's just ugly. It's just an ugly thing. And it made me feel uncomfortable. It made me feel uncomfortable because I love the sport and that would damage it. Imagine if Nate had got really, really badly hurt.
Mm.
Like straight away, it would have cast a shadow over the UFC. It would have been all over the news in a negative way. And it would have made us all feel uncomfortable because we knew it was happening. It was fortunate the MMA gods shined down on us on that day, but I also feel like there was some meddling in the background to make sure that didn't happen. Because I think the closer the fight got, the more the UFC realized how much they were going to bury themselves if Nate got hurt.
Yeah.
And he was most likely going to get hurt. It's the same thing. It's the same thing as the very last fight that I called. And this is another good example of the nonsense, the posturing and the propaganda. Like that last fight that I called was Max Holloway against Calvin Kattar, right? UFC, what is it? UFC on ABC One, the very first
Mm.
time that UFC had been on ABC, first time combat sports have been on ABC in 20 something years. And then we're going into the fifth round, and you've got one guy that's being beaten senseless by another fighter, right? Now, there's no reason why that fight shouldn't have been stopped at the end of the fourth round. No discredit to Calvin Kattar, but he didn't gain anything by taking that fifth round beating. But what we did see was the clip coming out of Dana talking to Hunter and being like, "Hey, we need to make sure you go straight to a doctor after that." And it looks kind of, oh, they just caught this on camera from across the arena. The dude was mic'd up. Like the receiver for the microphone was attached to the camera that was filming him from across the other side of the arena. Like the whole thing is staged to protect the UFC. Like, and I watched that and I'm like, that's just dirty. Yeah. Like actually do something to protect the fighter. Don't do something to protect the sport or the company if the fighter gets damaged. Yeah. That hurt me to watch that because I could see the game being played. Like this pretending that they had some kind of concern for Calvin Kattar. I just didn't buy it. And I'm standing there keeping my mouth shut because I've already said too much a few weeks before. And I'm already right on the edge of the chopping block thinking, this might be exactly what I was talking about a couple of weeks ago, Like, why did somebody not get involved and stop that fight when it needed to be stopped? Calvin Kattar's not the same fighter that he was after that fight. It's horrible to say, but I've seen it before. I've seen fighters take 1, 2, 3 more shots than they absolutely needed to, and they've never been the same again. People don't really. I love this sport. I love a damn good knockout. I love someone getting their clock absolutely cleaned. But what I don't want to see is that person affected for the rest of their life. Like we know the risks that we're taking on getting into there. You don't want to feel like you're up against the referee and the organization, though. That's not sport.
Yeah, it does feel like lip service a bit when you see clips like that, but then any sort of conscious attempt to start a fighters union or anything that's going to make a real difference seems to get shut down quite quickly. So it's hard to sort of take those moments genuine when you've seen instances like that.
I've been on the inside for too long. I remember watching Frankie Edgar put his world title belt in the overhead locker flying back from Canada, and the ring girls were sitting in first class, and I'm like, this doesn't make sense to me. Yeah. I remember sitting around a table at Red Rock Casino at the steakhouse at Red Rock Casino at the very first Fighters Summit, and I remember watching one guy who I don't know who he was or what he did or anything. He looked like a Klingon to me for Dana and his mates. I watched him get paid $10,000 to drink a bottle of hot sauce, and I was sitting there having just headlined the co-main event of the O2 Arena, and I got the same amount of money that he got for drinking the hot sauce. Like I was on 5 and 5, and he got $10,000 for drinking hot sauce in front of all these fighters. I don't know who that was to benefit, because I know that half of the guys around that table weren't making the same money he was making drinking that hot sauce. I'm like, so it was a slow unraveling for me while I was on the inside, and I still love the UFC as it is, but I can't help but feel like it's tainted by the humans involved. And I don't hate the UFC because of that. It just reminds me that humans can be less than perfect sometimes.